What's up? We are going to be doing a UFC lightweight division tier list. That's right, in honor of Charles Oliveira fighting Beneil Dariush this weekend at UFC 289. It honestly feels like a title fight. It feels like the main event. So what better time to break down the 155-pounders than now? And I'm really excited for this one because this is really the marquee division in the UFC. There are so many big names in the lightweight division. And before we get into it, I just want to give you guys a breakdown on what kind of criteria I am going off of so that it makes sense to you guys. So the S tier, this is basically the champion, the best fighter in the division. The A tier, these are guys that are on the cusp of getting a title fight that we are convinced would have a close fight with the champion almost every time. The elite tier, these are guys that are going to be a staple in the top 5 of the lightweight division, or they've been a staple in the top 5 and they're still good enough to be there. The B tier, they're really solid. Like I'm talking 6 through 12 in the lightweight division. These are guys that haven't really had a chance to prove that they are able to get into the top 5, or they've been fraud checked. The above average tier, pretty self-explanatory, guys that maybe are just not good enough to be in the top 10 or used to be in the top 10, but they're beginning to slide. The D tier, these are guys that are just not that good. You know what I mean? They're okay. They can sometimes put on a good performance, but they're not really good enough to ever make the rankings. Or they are very young and promising contenders, prospects that just are getting better and aren't anywhere close to being ranked at this point in time because they just got to the UFC. The F tier, the wash tier, these are guys that are terrible or washed. I mean, very self-explanatory. So let's just get into it. And I do have a surprise at the end of this video. I'm just going to let you guys know now. But the first and the best representative of the lightweight division is going to be Islam Makhachev. He is the most well-rounded fighter, one of the most well-rounded fighters in all of MMA, an elite grappler, really solid striking, extremely hard to hit, defensively sound, solid boxing, fast hands, a lot of power as well. I mean, this is not going to come as a surprise to anyone, but here's another guy that I think could give him a tough fight. That is Beneil Dariush, the man that'll be fighting this weekend. I believe he's going to go out there and beat a guy in Charles Oliveira. Now, it would be a little bit unfair of me to put Charles Oliveira in anything other than the A tier, given that he just lost his belt, and he could still go out there and redeem himself against a guy like Beneil Dariush. I could see it. We could all see it. This is the best finisher in UFC history that had pretty much 3 title wins, that was on his way to being the lightweight GOAT. And who's going to count him out yet? You know what I mean? Now, it looks like he's against the odds. He's probably going to have a tough fight with Beneil Dariush. And in all likelihood, Beneil Dariush, because he's a similar stylistic problem for Charles, will probably go out there and beat him. And if Beneil Dariush fights Islam Makhachev, because he's also an elite level grappler that is defensively sound, that has really solid striking and a lot of power, I think it would be a chess match. I think Islam Makhachev and Dariush would be a 5-round, 48-47 kind of decision in either way. Now, of course, you might have to lean towards Islam right now, but if Beneil Dariush can go out there and sun Charles Oliveira, then we're off to the races. We're talking about a potential new champion there in Beneil Dariush. But it's time to talk about a guy that is just not really in that conversation, that probably will never be a champion. I don't think Dustin Poirier is ever going to win a belt. He might get to a title shot, because if he beats Justin Gaethje this summer and he gets that BMF belt, then he would arguably deserve a title shot. You know what I mean? That'd be a win over Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje, who just fraud checked Rafael Fiziev. Remember, a lot of us were sitting here and saying Rafael Fiziev is the next big thing. He's going to challenge Islam Makhachev in the future. He's got really good takedown defense and he's knocking a lot of people out. Well, Justin Gaethje put that to bed and showed that he's still rightfully a top 5 guy. And it was really relieving to actually see him fight someone that was a young up-and-comer. Whereas Dustin Poirier hasn't really done that. But to be fair, Dustin, we know he's still that guy when it comes to the striking alone. Now, I think that Charles, I think that Beneil, I think that Islam are going to beat Gaethje and Poirier 9 out of 10 times, or maybe even more than that. Or at least Islam Makhachev, I think he would have his way with these guys. They're not good enough to be in the A tier because, simply put, they're just not well-rounded enough. They're strikers. And in the lightweight division, the best of the best are usually guys that can mix it up. And speaking of a guy that can mix it up, Arman Tsaryukyan, I'm going to put him in the top of the elite tier. I'm going to put him in front of Dustin Poirier because he hasn't had a chance to prove that he's an A-tier guy yet, but I do think he's elite. I think he could beat a guy like Dustin Poirier. I think he could beat a guy like Justin Gaethje if he takes them to the ground, because they've just been shown to have really sloppy wrestling defense or submission defense in Justin Gaethje's case. Do I think he'd beat Beneil Dariush and Charles Oliveira? No. Why? Because I think his hands leave a lot to be desired. That's right, his boxing isn't really there yet, and I feel like if you're looking at everyone on the screen right now, everyone but Arman Tsaryukyan has some pretty solid boxing, some pretty slick power and speed in their hands. Now, Arman has a great kicking game, and he's an elite grappler, but you kind of need that extra pop in your hands to stick around in this top 5 for a while. Maybe he can still improve, but either way, I still think he's good enough to take down Dustin, to take down Justin Gaethje, and to capitalize off of that. But I'm not willing to put him in the A tier yet because I don't think he's at that level right now. He's still very young. Tony Ferguson, with the orange hair, the dyed hair Tony Ferguson, the worst version of Tony that there ever was. That was welterweight Tony, by the way, the one that fought Nate Diaz, looking like a penguin straight out of Happy Feet. He's just a shell of his former self. He doesn't even look intimidating now at all. And he is basically the bodiless shell of Mr. Krabs, as washed as it could possibly get. It honestly feels evil to even talk about this guy fighting. The only person that I would maybe consider matching Tony up with would be the red panty man himself, Conor McGregor, just because it's a big money fight, and if you're gonna have a retirement fight where you're probably gonna lose, you may as well have it against Conor and make a boatload of cash. Now, why did I just put Conor in the D tier? Because I don't think he's above average. I don't think he's a B tier guy either. And you might sit here and say, well, he's only lost to Dustin, Poirier, and Khabib. Well, who the fuck has he beat? And I always say that. He hasn't had a good win since 2016, bro. That's like 8 years ago. Donald Cerrone coming off of 2 KO losses is not a good win. He is not as washed as Tony Ferguson, okay? And some of you guys are going to disagree with this, but I don't even think Conor McGregor could be a PFL champ. He just simply hasn't improved. And you can't possibly improve when you're waking up in the kind of $100 million houses, not houses, but $100 million lifestyle that Conor McGregor's living in. You know what I mean? On the Lamborghini yacht, watching cars race around while you're on a yacht in Europe, partying with celebrities, waking up in Versace sheets. He's too pampered. And all of these guys, you know, even Tony is probably hungrier than Conor at this point in his career because he needs the money more. Everyone could use the win money more than Conor McGregor. I do think, however, he would beat Paddy Pimblett, who is in the F tier. I think Paddy Pimblett isn't very, I mean, come on, man. He's not good at all. I think Conor would probably school him, to be honest. He'd probably KO him. That being said, though, all right, this is where we get a little bit controversial. Paddy Pimblett could take Conor down and submit him. Now, Paddy doesn't have the best takedown defense, and to be honest, Conor's on the sauce now, and he's probably going to have a pretty good size advantage and strength advantage, but Paddy Pimblett, remember, is a pretty big guy for the lightweight division that has a tough weight cut. Now, it also could just be the fact that he's fat as fuck outside of camp, eats a lot of ice cream, and just puts on fat. Whereas he's not actually like the biggest, strongest kind of guy that you could think of when you're talking about the lightweight division. Fuck it, dude. I'll put Paddy Pimblett in the F tier. You know, but then I have to put another guy in the F tier in the future that I'm not really ready to say is in the F tier, but it is what it is. Mateusz Gamrot is in the B tier. Mateusz Gamrot. I do think Conor would beat Paddy Pimblett, by the way. And Paddy Pimblett would not have an easy fight with Ferguson, but it'd be competitive, and I think I'd actually give him the edge. Mateusz is really good. All right, let's get to this guy. I've called him a fraud. I've called him fraud rot, scam rot, you name it. But he's still solid, and he's going to be a guy that's consistently in that 5 through 10 spot. He's not that young. I think he's like 32, 33 years old. So it's not like he's a fresh, up-and-coming guy that in the future could win a belt. I don't think he's good enough to be able to beat a guy like Arman Tsaryukyan. He pretty much robbed Arman Tsaryukyan, lost 4 rounds to him, and Arman's also a lot younger, so he will be improving more rapidly. I don't think he beats Charles. I don't think he beats Beneil. I don't think he beats Islam. I think he has a tough fight with, to be honest, I actually do think he could maybe beat Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. But Justin Gaethje maybe because Justin's terrible on the ground. I actually don't know if he beats Dustin. I'd actually pick Dustin to beat him, which is why he's not elite. And the reason is because he's not that dangerous on the ground. He has really relentless wrestling, an amazing gas tank, okay striking, pretty okay on the feet. I mentioned Arman's boxing in the past in this video. Mateusz Gamrot outboxed him, but did get outkicked. Arman is a good kicking game. Mateusz Gamrot is not really the kind of guy to just finish you on the ground or do a lot of damage. He's not really a finisher, and I think Dustin would be able to weather the storm and maybe knock him out. He gets dropped in basically every single one of his fights, Mateusz Gamrot. So he's good. He's just not really going to be a top 5 guy. I don't think he'll ever fight for a belt. That's the kind of guy that I'm talking about. Jalin Turner is going to be in the B tier too. Another guy that's going to be around the 6 through 12 spot for some time now. Also very young. He has the potential to be a top 5 guy, an elite guy in the future. He still needs to work on his takedown defense, but to be honest, he could have beat Mateusz Gamrot. He dropped him twice. And I think that if they were to fight again, and I've said this many times, he would beat Gamrot, and I'd pick him to do so. I think Jalin Turner is one of the most underrated strikers in the UFC. He's incredibly fast on the feet, has a ton of power in his hands, and also has the ability to submit you. He is incredibly dangerous. He's a finisher. So I think that eventually he'll work his way up to the elite spot. It's just right now, he's really only getting matched up with guys like Dan Hooker, guys that are pretty much washed. Now, Dan Hooker, I'm going to put him in the D tier because yes, he is a little bit washed. He's older, but I'm not ready to say he's as bad as Paddy Pimblett. And I do think him and Conor would be competitive. He's definitely able to beat a guy like Tony Ferguson at this point in time. But yeah, Jalin Turner is going to destroy Dan Hooker. And that's the issue with Jalin Turner, is he's going to keep beating up on these guys like Hookers and, a guy in Brad Riddell. And people are going to start to say, well, you're only beating up old men. Wait until you fight someone that's good, and you lost to Gamrot, but it was really close. And he's training with Khamzat Chimaev. I think his grappling will improve. Now it's time to get to the biggest fraud on the list, Guram Kutateladze, the fraud of all frauds. That's right, the guy that's only touted as being incredibly good because he has close fights with other European guys, like a Mateusz Gamrot, like a Damir Ismagulov. That's another guy that he's had a close fight with. But listen, he's just above average. I don't understand why the hardcore fans think of this guy so highly. He's not that special. I've even heard the Weasel say he would beat someone like Rafael Fiziev, which is just absolutely comical and laughable. There's no fucking way he would beat Rafael Fiziev in a fight, all right? He's good everywhere, Guram, but he's like the mediocre Marvin Vettori of the lightweight division, to be honest. He's okay everywhere, but he's not amazing anywhere. He's got a couple of good tricks up his sleeve. He's got a couple of body kicks, but that's kind of it, dude. He's going to get out-grappled by plenty of these guys, and he's going to get outstruck by plenty of these guys that are ahead of him. Rafael Fiziev would destroy this man, and Rafael Fiziev's another guy that I just put in the B tier because, like Jalin Turner, he still has potential to crack that top 5 in the future. He just got put in his place by Dustin, but again, made it very competitive. Made that second round close, and the second round was the deciding round. He has a lot of potential. And back to Jalin Turner, I actually think Jalin Turner would beat Rafael Fiziev. I really do. I think Fiziev's power is a little bit overrated, to be honest. He's been fraud checked by Dustin Gaethje. A lot of people thought he was going to go in there and knock Gaethje out. When I had rewatched Gaethje's fights leading up to that fight, I said to myself, wait a second, I don't think he's going to knock Gaethje out. He doesn't have crazy power, and Gaethje's head movement is pretty underrated. Well, I do think that Jalin Turner has a power advantage over Rafael Fiziev, has a massive reach advantage like he would over most guys. And I think he'd find the target. And I think he'd put Rafael out, to be honest. Rafael's pretty tough, but I think Turner's the more dangerous guy on the feet. But back to Guram, man. Guram Kutateladze. He's above average. He's going to be a guy that's the 12 spot, the 20 spot, you name it. He's in the mix there. Drew Dober. I'm going to put Drew Dober in the above average tier. He's another guy that's going to be floating around the 15 to the 20 spot. Now, he is getting up there in age. He just got KO'd by Matt Frevola. That's not necessarily the best sign. But, he's a tough man that has lots of power in his hands and is pretty solid on the feet. It's just he doesn't have the skills to be a top 10 guy, let's be honest. Damir Ismagulov, another guy that was overhyped just because he is someone that's from the Eastern European area and had a couple of close fights with other Eastern European guys like Guram Kutateladze. Well, he got dominated and showed levels by Arman Tsaryukyan, which is just another example of why Arman Tsaryukyan's in the elite tier, because he truly has separated himself from the guys like Damir Ismagulov. You know what I mean? But Damir Ismagulov, again, he's not going to be good enough to be in the top 10, and people speak about him and Guram like they're the next future champions, when in reality, they're just above average. RDA, another guy that I'm going to put in the above average tier, used to be a champion in the lightweight division and had fought for a belt at the welterweight division, but he is a little bit older now. Now, he's only really losing to the best of the best. That's a loss to Rafael Fiziev. He's still able to go out there and beat a guy like Renato Moicano. He's still able to go out there and dominate guys that are just the average unranked fighter on the ground with his grappling. Very well-rounded, not really declining that quickly, which is why he's still pretty good. I think he would give any of these guys in the above average tier a run for their money. but maybe just not good enough to be able to beat the guys in the B tier at this point in time. Grant Dawson. I'm going to put Grant Dawson in the above average tier as well. Only one loss in the UFC, tons of submissions. I think this guy is going to be the dark horse of the above average tier. I honestly think that this guy could probably beat most people. And you know what? I actually would pick him to beat most of these guys. I think Grant Dawson is a problem, but very slept on, to be honest. You know, this is a guy that was able to make easy work of a guy like Jared Gordon and a guy in Mark Madsen that's a pretty solid grappler, and he submitted both of them. So showing levels over these other guys that are pretty okay in this division. Next up, Michael Chandler. I'm going to put Michael Chandler in the B tier. I think he's starting to slide down. I still think he's going to take out Conor McGregor with relatively ease, but if you were to put Chandler in there against a guy like Guram Kutateladze, I think he would take him out fairly easily. If you were to put Chandler in there with a guy like Damir Ismagulov, he takes him out pretty easily. So I still think that Michael Chandler is good enough to be in the top 10 or at least 11 and 12 in that division. Another guy that I'm going to put into the above average tier is the King Bobby Green, the most entertaining man in the UFC. Now, remember, this guy used to be ranked. He's been a staple in that 15 through 20 spot as he's gotten older. Yes, he looked pretty rough against Jared Gordon, but to be fair, it was just in the first round and he had just come off of a KO loss to Drew Dober. You know what I mean? And like, that's just not really going to make for the best performance right off the bat. And we don't really know how it would have gone if that fight were to continue. The same thing can be said for Jared Gordon. Jared Gordon was looking really solid against King Bobby Green, but he got headbutted. He got the shit end of the stick, and I hope he turns around to do really well for himself because he was robbed against Paddy Pimblett. He showed levels there. But, you know, I still, I don't know, man. I don't think either of these guys are above average. I'm starting to look at the other guys in the same tier. I don't think that King Green or Jared Gordon would be able to beat RDA or Damir Ismagulov, to be honest. So I'm going to put them one cut below. But I do think Bobby Green would be able to take out a guy like Dan Hooker maybe. And I think he'd have a competitive fight with Conor McGregor. I think that Jared Gordon would have a competitive fight with Conor McGregor. I would lean to Conor though. But yeah, I'm actually going to put them in the D tier after all that talk. Carlos Diego Ferreira. This guy is kind of like the Brad Tavares of the lightweight division. If you're beating a guy like Diego Ferreira, you're probably going to be ranked after that, or you're going to crack into the rankings. That's a good sign for you. But like Brad Tavares, he's still not like the best gatekeeper in the division. It's not like you beat Carlos Diego Ferreira and you're 2 wins away from a title shot. You know what I mean? It's just a promising look, but he's still pretty decent. He's coming off of a brutal KO win against Michael Johnson. I mean, that was one of the best knockouts of the year. Another guy that I'm pretty interested in, and it is Chase Hooper. Now, he's in the D tier, but he's not in the F tier. I don't think he's that bad. I actually think Chase Hooper's move to 55 was a really good thing for his career. He looked rejuvenated, and look at the pace that he just put on his previous opponent. I mean, he completely broke him and set like a strikes record for a 3-rounder in the lightweight division. He looked like a mini Alexander Hernandez with the pace that he was putting on this guy, and he's still very young. He's in his early 20s. He looked rejuvenated. His chin looked a lot better. His striking is improving, and I mean, if he can keep that pace and just continue to put on a little bit more size and pack on muscle to that frame and get better with his striking, we're looking at a guy that could potentially be ranked someday. So I do like Chase Hooper at this point in time. I think we all wrote him off after he got KO'd before he moved to the lightweight division, but it's a good move. And again, when we see guys move up, they typically do pretty well. Claudio Puelles is going to go in the F tier. He's just terrible, to be honest. One of the most one-dimensional, sloppy strikers I've ever seen in my entire life. So I'm going to put Claudio Puelles all the way down there. Jim Miller is a guy that I'm going to put in the D tier. I think he's pretty solid. He's coming off of a really good KO win. Jim Miller at this point in his career is like a 500 level fighter, but kind of reminds me of Andrei Arlovski. Now, I know Arlovski's at the point to where he's starting to lose a lot. So maybe Jim Miller's not there yet, but Andrei Arlovski in the heavyweight division had a few years from like 2020 to 2022 where he would win one, he would lose one, he would win one. If you beat Jim Miller, you're probably going to eventually be a guy that's above average right now. It's not like he's a walk in the park just because he's in his 40s. The most wins in the UFC history. So Jim Miller's pretty solid, dangerous on the feet, durable, has a submission game as well. I do think at this point in time, he would beat Tony Ferguson. As sad as that sounds, guys, I know. Matt Frevola. I'm going to put Matt Frevola in the above average tier. I think he's going to take Drew Dober's place as that like tough man, big puncher in the division. He is younger than Drew Dober. Do I think he's good enough to be ranked in the top 10? No, I don't think he'll ever get there, but still, he's going to be like the tough man, the big puncher in the 12 through 20 range for some time now. Jordan Levitt. I'm going to put Jordan Levitt ahead of Claudio Puelles, but I'm still going to put him right there with Paddy Pimblett because, quite frankly, even though he can get better because he's still young, he lost to Paddy Pimblett, and that's just not a good look. So this is a guy that, you know, is okay at the bottom of the lightweight division, but unless he makes drastic improvements, if it's the same guy showing up, I don't think he's going to be able to put himself in the top 25, the top 20. And another guy that is in the D tier that's very promising is Bahamondes, Ignacio Bahamondes. I forget who he just beat, but he had a really solid performance where he just leg kicked this guy to oblivion, and he's fast. He's in his early 20s. I think that this guy is going to be a guy that could potentially be ranked in the future. So I'm going to put him in there. Another guy that I'm going to put in the D tier, I am talking about Gregor Gillespie. Where the fuck has this guy been? Now, I'm not going to put him in the above average tier anymore, to be fair, because he hasn't fought for 2 years and he's 36 years old, and being 36 years old in the lightweight division isn't that great. And it's like, you've been inactive, but I just want to give him a shout out because Gregor Gillespie was such an entertaining guy to watch. Not only because he got KO'd brutally by Kevin Lee and that made for a great highlight, but also because his style was just like, he would go out there and break guys with his pace. Remember what he did to Carlos Diego Ferreira. And you know what? I am going to put him in the above average tier. He broke Carlos Diego Ferreira, had a really tough first round, was able to last longer and then submit, or I think he either TKO'd Carlos Diego. He's tough as nails. So I have to give Gregor Gillespie a little bit of a shout out. Money, Moicano, he's going to be in the above average tier as well. Yeah, Moicano is pretty solid, man. But it's like, I don't think he's good enough to be in the top 10. He got completely shut down by RDA. And yes, he took that on short notice, but it's like, I don't see him being able to necessarily go out there and have his way with anyone in the above average tier. I think all of those fights would be really competitive. You know what I mean? He wouldn't just go out there and school any of these guys. He could probably go out there and beat a guy like Jared Gordon or beat a guy like Chase Hooper, obviously, who still is really green. So yeah, this is the tier list, guys. Islam Makhachev in the S tier. Beneil Dariush, Charles Oliveira in the A tier. Last but not least, Volkanovski is going to go in the A tier. That's right. I'm not crazy enough to put Volkanovski in the S tier. You know, he had a really solid fight with Islam Makhachev, but he's also not a lightweight, and he's only had one fight at lightweight. He might not have the easiest fight with a guy like Dustin Poirier. We just simply don't know. We're waiting to find out with his approach to a guy who is very dangerous on the feet, like a Yair Rodriguez. I'm not just going to put Volk in the S tier yet. I'll put him in the A tier. I do think he's elite. I do think he has potential to be a champion in this division. I think he'd beat Charles Oliveira. I think he'd fuck Charles up on the feet, to be honest. And I don't think Charles would be able to take that man down. And Volkanovski's a hard guy to submit. He'd have a tough fight with Beneil and Islam, though. It's like a 50-50 matchup with those guys. So yeah, that was the surprise. Volkanovski in the A tier. Until next time. What's up, guys? It's Lucas Tracy MMA, and I just wanted to let you know that I will now be taking on more clients for personalized nutrition programs, specifically for people that compete in combat sports. If you're a boxer, a wrestler, or you're competing in MMA and you need help to lose weight, to get lean before that final weight cut, that's what I'm here to help you out with. So if you're interested in a customized nutrition program that is tailored specifically to you, then you can click the link in the description, fill out the form, and I'll get back to you. Until next time.